Hello, everyone, and welcome to Envision's third Design Talk of 2017. We have a really great one for you today. Jay Melone is here with us to talk about how to get your executive team on board for your design sprints. I'm Margaret Kelsey. I work on our content and community here at Envision, and we're going to be taking over our Twitter feed for the next hour. So you can use hashtag DesignTalks and tweet at us any questions and comments you have. We'll be retweeting the comments, and Jay will answer a few of your questions at the end of his talk. We do have a lot of information to cover today, so we might run almost the full hour with just his talk alone and only have time for a few questions. So get them in nice and early. We are recording the talk today, and we're going to have that recording and a recap up on our blog and also the landing page used to sign up in just a few days in case you miss any parts of it or want to pass it along to friends and colleagues. I'll be sending you an email with a link to that recording and any other links we discussed today so you can keep an eye on your inbox for that. And without further ado, I would like to present to you Jay. Jay, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Margaret. Thanks for having me. Today we're gonna kind of continue the discussion along the journey of design sprints. I think a few months ago we talked about bringing them in for the first time into your company, and what we've learned and heard from a lot of people is that they're excited about it, and now they're trying to get others in their company on board with the whole process. So my name is Jay. I'm with a firm called New Haircut. I like to say that we're pretty good at doing two things: thinking and building. The building part is where we've always sort of come from. The thinking part, as crazy as it sounds, has been this evolution for us. And when I talk about thinking, it's more along the lines of innovation, which I know is a heavy, sometimes ugly word. But where we started is more of a traditional development shop, right? So my partner, his name is John. He started back in 2003, and we came together formally in 2010 as New Haircut. And a lot of the time what we were doing is taking specs and working through RFPs and a lot of ideas that others had thought about and shared, and then we were more of an execution on, right? So you could hire New Haircut to come in and build your websites, your e-commerce sites, your mobile applications. And they would come out and they'd look great and they'd function and they'd be things that could scale well. But the challenge that we kept bumping into was that the people that had been thinking about these ideas, that had been living in the shoes of the customers or had been a customer themselves of the problems that they were trying to solve, that communication to our team, to makers, to people that are designers and engineers that could build at least digital products, that's another constituent, and then a third is the actual end users or the consumers of these products. And so we were really trying to look for a new starting point for us, because just jumping to building solutions is definitely not. It's a challenge, and it's not going to result in products that really get the needle moving and get customers engaged and happy and sharing them and promoting them. So John, my co-founder, back in late 2015, he started searching for a new way to bring these three sort of groups together to build better products for the companies that we work with. And so at the time, there was no sprint book, but there was a website that GV had put out. It's still there. It's gv.com/sprint. He read through it and he shared it with me. I still remember him slacking it over to me and spending like 20 minutes on it and saying, probably called it crap, or this isn't something that is really going to help us. What could we actually get done in 5 days? So all the things that you guys are probably hearing from the executives in your company or whomever, to be honest with you, at least I had the initial same reaction. But we're a small company, so we were able to look at it and say, like, this could help us, so let's just try it. Let's experiment with it. At the time, there weren't many resources out there, so we just kind of went headfirst into it. And even though the initial sprints that we ran were really they were messy to some degree, especially compared to what they look like today, but they worked, and we saw this immediate uptick in terms of collaboration, both inside New Haircut as well as with the clients that we were working with. And then we went on to launch these solutions. and you saw people actually using these things the way that they were intended to be used. So we knew we were onto something, and we decided to go kind of full bore and bake design sprints into our process. That kind of led to, we would share more and more of those stories. We were fortunate enough to get picked up by publications like Envision, like Google Ventures and Medium and other pubs around. And that led to us being in a position where companies were coming to us and asking us, how do you guys run design sprints? How does it fit into the larger picture of design thinking and innovation and business transformation? So we started teaching these things all of a sudden. And then, sort of the cherry on top was launching something like Duco. Duco is a free iOS and Android app that we created to help teams prepare for their first sprints. And we did it as an exercise so that we could not only kind of eat our own dog food and build products like we do for our clients, but also to embed even deeper into what design sprints are and how the team comes together around that. So that's kind of been our evolution from a shop that can build really well into a shop that can bring ideas and insights and align with customers with the business and where we're headed. So if you're here today, first of all, thank you for coming. I'm excited to be here and talk to you guys. The reason that this talk came to be is because I spend a lot of my time talking to people like yourselves that are excited about design sprints. You've read the book, you've tried a couple, maybe you've been to one of our workshops or another workshop or some kind of training, and now you're at this, you're kind of staring forward and you're excited to bring them in, but maybe you're facing a little bit of resistance, or there's a little bit of fear in terms of, if I don't get this right, it's gonna fall on its face and I'm never gonna get the approval to try it again. So it's for you guys. I want to share as much as we've learned along the last a year and a half or so about design sprints and how they fit into the bigger picture and what's truly important to the folks that you're trying to get the green light on design sprints inside your company. So I do assume that you guys have a ground level understanding of what design sprints are if you're here today. If not, just a quick step back is that it's this 5-day framework. It was popularized and kind of put out there by Google Ventures and their design sprint partners. And it follows this 5-day framework where you're working through these series of 5 days so that at the end of it, you hope to have validation around a prototype that you've built to solve a single big challenge. So there's a lot of good things that have happened, right? So there's this great book. It was published by some really smart people inside Google Ventures that were previously working at Google and elsewhere. It's become a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller. It's easy to read. The concepts are great. They do a lot of analogies and stories that they share, from building robots to online coffee stores and whatnot. Even just Googling today for design sprints, I found 273,000 results. So, and that's in the course of less than 1 year. So it's really cool to see all of this excitement around design sprints. So the pins on this map are where we're currently running workshops to talk about design sprints and design thinking and product development. And each time we go into a city, we have people coming from all parts of the world, and they're excited about it, and communities that they're coming from are also talking about and excited about sprints. So there's a lot of great momentum. It's exciting to see. But as I have more and more conversations with some of these people, it's not all positive. It's not all success stories. And this goes for both young, growing startups as well as large corporations that we've spoken to, where the guy on the left inside a startup, he's I don't know if he's still struggling, but it seemed like months that he was trying to get his team on board and committed to sprints, and he did a number of things to try to just move the needle a tiny bit, and there was a lot of pushback constantly. And then contrast that to someone I spoke to in a really large financial institution, and there was sort of this immediate pushback from him, thinking, he works with stakeholders that are positioned around the world, so how could he possibly get them on planes and in a room for 5 consecutive days? So we'll talk through all of those challenges and how we're going to work around that. But the reality for you guys is that you're not really out to sell a design sprint. So, and this is the challenge. You're going to use a design sprint to get momentum moving forward, and it's easy enough to consume, just like the book is, that people can wrap their heads around it. But the point is that I'm hoping to help you guys use the design sprint as a small project, a small pilot that's going to turn into a lot of other positive momentum. And this is the thing, the bigger picture stuff. You're going to hear me say bigger picture probably too many times today. Sorry for that. But the bigger picture stuff up here, where your executives, your VPs of innovation, your business transformation leaders, global UX designers, these people that are charged with really large initiatives, they're not thinking about a design sprint. They know about it, they know it's popular, they see that you're doing backflips about it, but they don't understand. It's hard for them to get down to that level for them to understand how that's going to help generate revenue, open up new business opportunities, new lines of business, right? And so hopefully by the end of today, you guys have an understanding of how to use a design sprint to just facilitate a lot of those bigger initiatives and paint that picture for them so that they can connect the dots. I hope that my goal here is to be pretty specific with the steps that we work through. It's a lot, like Margaret said, so I'll get through it as best I can, and then I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of questions, and I will make myself available after this talk as well. So let's just start by kind of laying the foundation of what the pushback is that we tend to hear. There's just, I tend to bucket these under four big categories. So I'll just kind of call them out here, and then we'll dig into each one. Design sprints are not, right? So people kind of assuming what a design sprint is not instead of what it is. We're already running sprints, we've heard. That'll never work here, right? It's just kind of throwing up your hands. And we can't spend 5 days on that. So within each one, there's a lot of articles and podcasts and things where practitioners or people that are even outside of a traditional sprint room tend to focus on what the design sprint is not, right? And so I tried to protect this person in particular, but this guy wrote an article linking design sprints to design thinking, right? And even the subject of his talk is assuming that a design sprint is intended to replace design thinking, and it's just not. There's never been a link. In fact, I don't even know if design thinking was mentioned in any of the pages of the book that GV put out. So, and similar, like this article, I know the intention of the author was to say, like, yeah, this could be cool, and there could be value here, but it's not this, it's not that. You shouldn't use it here, and you shouldn't use it there. And he's right. There are plenty of instances where you should not use a sprint, but in no way should we really spend all of our time thinking about what it's not and instead focus on the value that it can bring. We're already running sprints, so unfortunately, GV used the term sprint. And we hear a lot, especially when you get into engineering circles, right? Because people have been hearing about sprints, and sprints have even bubbled up into executive offices where they hear that their teams are working in these 2-week burn downs. So you might have to do a little bit of education about, no, we're not talking about that kind of sprint. We're talking about design sprint and this 5-day framework. The other thing is that'll never work. And when I've asked people why they feel that way, they start to share a little bit more. I mean, I kind of consider them excuses, but they say things like, we already did our research. And we're going to talk about how research fuels a design sprint. And again, it's not to replace research. Design sprints actually need research in order for them to become successful. We've tried innovation. Again, innovation is, it's one of those words, you love it or hate it. Most people aren't comfortable with it because you have large management consultants talking about innovation and doing these really large scale initiatives with hundreds of consultants kind of swooping in and building big innovation labs. And that's not what this is. This is actually small teams moving in and doing things and kind of festering up good momentum, just like small and organically, and kind of building out from there. And we're also going to talk about how design sprints fit into the bigger picture of design thinking and sort of process change. Design isn't my job is another thing they tend to say. And I understand this because they're not designers, and they associate design with being things that are done in Sketch and Photoshop and things that are related to pixels and screens. And that's not necessarily the case, but they just don't feel welcome, or they don't know how to approach the design discussion. They've never really had a seat at that table. And so that's an interesting thing that's starting to happen, that we see as people that are not typically part of that job function per se can join the conversation. And then the other thing, which is totally true, is that our customers don't know what they want, and that's true 99 times out of 100, because traditionally what we do is we go and put a blank slate in front of those customers, the same that we do with our stakeholders, right? How many of you UX designers have had stakeholder interviews where you walk into the corner office and say, I'm working on problem X, what do you want it to do, right? And that conversation just quickly falls apart, because there's not a framework to have a discussion between those two types of people to get to where you want to go. And on top of it, the customer isn't in the room with you. So, the last thing, the last sort of bucket of pushback that we hear, and when I've asked people in the workshops that we run, how many people hear that people in their company have said, we won't spend 5 days on this, we can't spend 5 days on this, and most hands in the room go up. To be honest with you, I spent most of my early days at Accenture, and as great as a company as it is, we were sort of paid to sit in a room, a war room, and spend weeks, days, weeks, honestly, sometimes even months putting spec docs together. And some of these documents would be 20, 40, 100 pages long. And then we had to convince other people to come and read those documents with us and talk about those documents and wake people up as they were falling asleep as you were reading through the documents. And at the end of it, maybe months down the road, we were at the point that we could start designing something, bringing some kind of visual component to this, or writing a line of code, right? And then months later, we would actually launch this product, and you guys all know the story, right? And it kind of goes to market and it blows up, or it completely misses the mark. So there's a lot that you can challenge these people on in terms of spending 5 days up front versus 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there over the course of months and even years to get to where you want to be in order to feel good about the products that you're going to be building. And then the other component that you guys should be aware is that what we've experimented with and continue to do is that not every single person needs to be in the room with you guys for 5 days, for 5 full days. For example, when you're prototyping, if the CEO is not going to be sitting next to you, like kind of culling copy and images and videos and designing screens, they can dip out and you can call them back in when it's time to do a review session of your prototype. So there's plenty of flex in terms of how much time they actually need to spend. So that's the pushback. I want to kind of now move into the part about what you guys can do to start getting these things, getting a little bit more momentum, getting these design sprints in particular adopted inside of your company. And I've sort of positioned them in 3 big things that you guys will need to do: prepare a pitch plan, to move from start to finish, and hopefully by the end of your planning, people will be leaning into this thing, and you'll have the momentum that you need to try out your first sprint. So the first thing in terms of preparing is just getting everything together. So really spending the time, just like you would when you're building a solution. When you're building a new website, when you're building a new application, you have to understand who you're building it for. So in this case, you guys are pitching a new process, a new tool that you're going to bring into the organization. And on top of that, you probably have 100 other tools or processes that they're in the back of their heads. So understanding what their hopes and fears and pains and gains and all that stuff are, just like you would when building a digital experience, you need to do the same in this case. Thinking about maybe they can't hire the people that they think they need to hire. Maybe they haven't had time to read the book and they just feel kind of left out of the discussion, and you need to just quickly educate them. And then from there, transitioning into understanding, if this did work, what would be the top 1 or 2 things that we could get done? Maybe it's this skunkworks project that they're really passionate about, that they know they can't get approval for, but maybe you can use it as a pilot to run the design sprint on. Maybe get them kind of excited about things like that. Or maybe it's a larger thing that they know is such a big initiative that it's been hard to get consensus around and start making traction. So once you have all that stuff, then you have context for your pitch. And your pitch is going to be sort of you transitioning into the salesperson. And this is where you get to really kind of put on your pitch hat, do your best impersonation of the salesperson really trying to bring in this new thing. You are selling a new process. And to do that, you're going to have to start big picture, right? So that's number 2 that I said, big picture. You have to start really like at the company level, right? Don't go in there talking about, this is really exciting for my project that I've been working on and I'm super excited about. It's not about you, right? So it's about the company. So, and you feel passionately that everyone can really win in this thing. And we're gonna explain how you can communicate that stuff. But then narrowing in on some of the challenges that you heard them talking about, again, going deeper into some of the opportunities that you can explore, and putting yourself in the position that you're gonna lead this, right? And on top of that, show your passion for this thing. If you guys are here listening to me ramble on for an hour, clearly you're committed, and if you read the book and if you have Duco on your phone, you have passion and you're excited about it and you really believe in it. And I do too, and that's why I'm here talking about it as well, and that's why we run the workshops that we do. We really believe that these things help, and let that show. You know, just as if you walked into a room and started smiling randomly at people, some people would get freaked out, but other people would probably smile back at you. Do the same thing. Show some passion in terms of what you're doing. And on top of it, like I was saying, show them that you're gonna own this. But in order for you to own this, you need their support. You need some authority inside the company. There's a great talk out on YouTube from Stanford's D School about how even the most noble causes, if you don't have the authority and the support from leadership in the company, if you're just a junior PM or a new UX designer, and you're working on things that are under the radar, if you don't have that support, it's going to be hard for you to move things forward. So that's what you need from them mostly. From here, inside your pitch, right? So you've prepared, you're now into your pitch on what design sprints are and how they're going to help. So start by just kind of quickly talking about what design sprints are. They're a tool, and you should use words like tool or framework. Don't talk about it as sort of like a panacea or an entire solution, because it's not. It's just a single tool. And again, remember, it's 5 days, right? And there's only so much you can get done in those 5 days. It's a lot, and it's efficient, and it's valuable, but talk about it in terms of, in that structure, as being a tool and a framework. What tends to work for me as well is to bring some success stories into the discussion, right? This isn't something that you cooked up over the weekend. In fact, Jake Knapp and those guys cooked it up over many weekends, and they battle tested it, and then Google kind of embraced it and built products like Google and Gmail and Hangouts. And then there's a whole litany of other companies that have used it and feel great about it. So talk about that. You don't have to go into elaborate detail, but talk about how others have done this, and there's proof. And then if it helps, you can use that squiggly diagram to kind of visualize what this thing looks like and how teams would come together around it. Transition from here, after you've talked about what a design sprint is, into what you can get done, what you're hoping to achieve from it. Again, think about the company, what's important to them. It can solve really complex business challenges. As long as you've done your homework and you're focused enough, you can run that through a design sprint and get some validation or invalidation. But at the end, no matter what, you are going to save over the long term in terms of project budgets and timelines. And that's going to get anyone in the company excited. It is a tool to help uncover customer insights. Remember, we talked about if you put blank canvases in front of people or just ask really open-ended questions about solutions, and you're all the way down the road talking about solutions, instead of starting at ground level in terms of what's important to the company and how the customer feels about that, Now with a design sprint, you do have some of those tools available to you. The other thing is, we talked about this briefly before, is it will bring people and departments and organizations together, right? So there's, if you guys work in, I've worked in plenty of companies where you have people that don't like each other. You have departments that don't want to share information across each other. We've worked with larger companies that have dozens of brands under their parent organization, and they don't really know how to communicate amongst each other. So these things, while you can start really small with a single pilot project, these things can fan out and eventually get people talking and collaborating. And then on top of it, one thing that might really get the CEO or the executive leaning forward in terms of your pitch right now is that if they're the hands-on CEO that can't give up the reins on owning that product, it's mostly because they've also never had the facility to feel confident that they're just going to hand over their dream and the thing that they had been thinking about and the thing that they had been working on with others before you or without you. How do they hand that over to you guys, to you as an individual or as the team? And what happens is when you're in that room, you're all doing it together. That person is watching you learn and hear the customer, and then you're working together to put solutions together. They're going to feel a lot better about empowering you with taking over that product ownership, which is going to let them go and do their kind of core job. And then lastly, on the pitch side, is make sure you communicate what a design sprint is not. And this is really important because a lot of people want to look at a design sprint and stretch it to be an entire solution, to be a shortcut to other things that they want to get done. It will save you time and money, right? But it doesn't mean that you can just cut out other things that are really important, right? It's not an entire design process. It's not design thinking. It doesn't replace customer research. You can't do 10 things in a single week just because it's really efficient and there's a framework for it, right? And it's not to be used as anyone's agenda, right? Remember that there's the whole notion that you're working individually but as a team, right? So it's not to be used to say like, this director of innovation is going to come in and kind of set the stage for how they want to run things, right? So just try to set the record in terms of what it is, what you can achieve with it, but also what it is not. And once you're at that point, then you're ready to kind of paint a plan of how you'd like to see this thing play out. Now, I just want to be clear. What I'm going to share with you guys over the next few minutes in terms of your plan that you're going to share is things that New Haircut as a team has learned over a year, more than a year, doing sprints, teaching people in workshops, building design sprint apps. I mean, we've like really put ourselves in the center of a lot of these things, and what we've learned is that a design sprint is a really great, efficient tool, but it's not the entire picture. And there's a lot of things that need to happen before you get into the sprint room in order to run a successful sprint. And we've learned that the hard way. But I don't intend on you guys taking this information and on day number one having this entire 6-step process that we work through. But use it as best you can. Again, the idea is that you want to communicate. You're going to start with a design sprint as your pilot. You're going to find a project, and that's going to be the thing that you incubate this whole process with. And then there's going to be things that you guys are already doing that are outside of a design sprint process, and then you figure out what stays, what goes, what gets tweaked. But the point is, I'm going to step you through how we work through this. Number one, we start with something called anchoring, so building a layer of trust, right? There's, like I said, there's people that aren't communicating, don't trust each other. There's been too many failed instances of innovation. They don't think it's going to work. So some of the cool things that you can do are exercises like a default future, right? It's sort of like doing the sprint questions at the beginning where everyone has these fears or reservations about what can get done inside those 5 days. It's similar, right? So you're going to do this default future where the question in front of you is, if nothing changes, what will the future look like? Right? And that's a way for people to talk about their fears or where they see the company going. It's probably a lot of doom and gloom, right? We're going to be out of business in 3 days or something crazy like this. But then everyone can step back and say, oh, wow, they're just as scared as I am. And then on the flip side, you do a visioning exercise, right? And you say, like, where do we want to be as a company? What would things look like in 6 months or a year from now, right? And that's an opportunity for everyone to have a big goal. And it has nothing to do with solutions or projects or anything like that. It's just, as a company, where do you want to be? From there, you can sort of transition into then getting the stakeholders in the room talking about what's important to them, right? That's the most important thing, because we're going to talk about this some more, but design sprints are this tool that really is latched onto the design process. But a buddy of mine, Nathan Kinch, who I think is watching, Nathan, he wrote a really great article, which spurred a lot of ideas from me and for the team at New Haircut as well, to expand on what we knew is that the people that are sitting in the room listening to you pitch are thinking about the business. They're thinking about revenue and cost savings and things like this. So when you're talking about design sprints, you're all the way down, right, all the way down the line in terms of where their brain goes. So you have to figure out a way to connect what's important to the business to this process. And some of these things like we're talking about here are important. And then when you get into the second set of exercises, which we label under framing, is that's when you start to connect what's important to the business, what problems does the business want to solve, what are they passionate about solving, and now the point of framing is to understand what your customers care about. So there's some things in here, we're still experimenting ourselves with a lot of these things, the order in which we do them, how we communicate them to the customers, to the team, what they look like. So the first thing would be, of course, just the research, going out and talking to your customers, observing them in that space in terms of how they experience the challenge in front of them, collecting a lot of information inside. Maybe it's an empathy map, right? So getting your personas together and understanding what these people are thinking and doing and saying and feeling. Turning those into job stories. The thing I like about job stories, user stories are great too. The thing I personally like about job stories is it's much more like event driven. And there's a link down at the bottom of those bullets from Intercom. I really liked how they position job stories, where it's instead of, as a user, I want X to happen so that Y can happen to me, which is sort of riddled with assumptions. Job stories are more, when this thing happens, I want X, or my motivation, so that Y, right, my expected outcome. So I just personally like the format of job stories. And the point is, once you have all of those, then you can go out back to your customers and try to understand, is this problem even worth solving to them, right? So now that you understand the jobs to be done and those stories and what they look like, now you can start to get an understanding of how important is this thing, right? Do they have other solutions that they're using? Do they appreciate those solutions? Do they not use anything at all because they just don't care enough, right? And so the business can be really passionate about solving a problem, and your customers could care less. So you're starting to get to the point where you have this sort of sweet spot of what the company is passionate about solving with what your customers care about. And that's that sort of, the last bullet is DVF, desirability, viability, feasibility. At this stage, you should have an understanding of what's desirable, both to the business as well as to your customers. And now your job is to figure out viability. Should we do this? Should we spend time on this? And the feasibility, can we actually do this? When you're there, this is probably the point in which you've started to have an understanding of what your challenge is for your sprint. So you can see all the stuff that we've learned needs to happen in order to get ready for a sprint. And once you do, and you go through the sprint and you go through the 5 days, the things that follow after for us in terms of wrapping up the sprint and understanding how to bridge into product development, we do a quick replay. So it's packaging up all the things that we've learned. Now you have to kind of splay out the rest of the features and what it would take to build it and the budgets to do that. And that's going to be a solid plan, right, that your executives in the room will appreciate that you can put that together. The article at the bottom here kind of carries on this discussion about what happens after a sprint. And then from there, there's the building, right? So these might be things that are more well understood. by you guys if you're coming from a design or engineering background, right? So all your infrastructure planning, code sprint. I'm sorry that we continued to butcher the word sprint, but we did. We use a code sprint as it's the week that follows sort of after the design sprint, and that's where our architects and engineers can do some experiments to decide how they'll actually build the technology, which stack we use, which frameworks and libraries and whatnot, and we kind of bang them around a little bit so that we know how we're actually going to build these solutions, and from there we move into the more traditional UX, UI, wireframing, designing screens, building out products, and then launching. Afterward, advance is all the stuff that we do once a solution is in the market. So capturing metrics, talking to customers, following up with them, building out our roadmap in terms of what comes next, and then continuing to roll out iterations and new features and making improvements. I want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time on scale. So scale is, remember we talked about the design sprint is going to be your pilot, right? It's going to be the thing that you pitch that where you want to start from. And from there, your busy high-level executives, the question in their mind is, how is this going to roll out to the rest of my leadership team, the rest of the organization, the rest of the brands under our company? How are we going to take this pilot and roll it out to everyone? And that's these steps are what I would recommend. And it's going to take you guys time to figure out what works for your team and your organization, but reporting on what worked and then pitting that against how things used to get done, right? So it's a lot of before these things, we would spend a lot of energy saying we're right and we feel strongly about this and we can get these things done. But now hopefully you have proof points that you can start to compare. Once you do, then it's going to take other leaders in the company. You're not going to be able to roll this out or manage this on your own forever. And you're going to have to find others that are going to sign up and lead these initiatives with you. And once you do, those will be the first people that you want to bring into the next round of either facilitated sprints that you're going to help facilitate and run. You can do workshops, you can do training. I'll talk to you guys about what Duco Plus is. So the point is that you want to start to enroll others into this process. You want to get others in the company excited about it. And I do also recommend when you're running a sprint, invite others in. Invite them into the room. Give them some rules. Tell them, please be quiet. Please don't contribute. Just kind of observe. Even if you set up a live stream for them to watch it from their offices, make it as easy as they can to witness what you guys are doing. I mean, honestly, even them just sitting and watching people laughing and yelling and putting stickies together, even that will look interesting to them, and they'll want to be. Chances are they'll want to learn more about it. So this is your opportunity when we talk about scale to roll this out and make it a bigger initiative than just about design sprints. The last thing I wanted to share with you in terms of your plan, and feel free to use this if it helps you guys. What you're looking at is the process that we work through. And I wanted to call this out because I want you guys to understand when we talk about design sprints, it is just a small piece of the entire puzzle, right? We talked about anchoring, framing. Design sprint fits into the validation box. And it's not even the entire thing. It's just a component of validation. And then what follows is the building, advancing, and scaling, right? So again, remember setting those expectations about what a design sprint is, but how it fits into the entire puzzle and how it can start to create this momentum that you can build upon from there. It won't happen overnight, but it's a really good structure that you can start things moving forward. So maybe this is a little idealistic, and maybe you have this list of questions or challenges or things building up in your minds about how this can actually work out, because not every company is going to be as open-minded to try these things, especially once you get into larger organizations. You have more people that are responsible for making decisions. Sometimes those companies are just going to be naturally reserved from trying new things. Maybe it's political. I think probably 90% of the companies that I've ever worked in, there's some form of politics. And then in the worst case scenario, you have companies that are just truly toxic, right? It's kind of like this polluted environment to work in. And no matter what you try, you get pushback, or you get people that are just saying, no, 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 we'll never do that. So I have 3 options for you to try if what we talked about so far is not helpful and not moving forward. One is Duco Plus. Duco Plus is a training kit that we really just recently rolled out. In fact, we just ran a workshop in New York a couple weeks ago where all the attendees got the first ever public version of Duco Plus. So Duco Plus is maybe some of the pushback, right? We talked about spending 5 days on this. What you might be able to do, what I wouldn't recommend is trying to squeeze a design sprint itself into a single day or a half a day, or doing it over a conference call. And I've heard all these things, companies trying to do this and it failing 9 times out of 10. But what you might try to do is just try to get people signed up to do a training exercise. Duco Plus is meant to be something that you can do on your own, inside your own offices. It has all the materials included in it. Again, it's 2 days. And hopefully if you get people excited about what happens in this do-it-yourself training, they'll be more willing to move forward and try out a full design sprint. If it's a little bit rockier and you feel like you need a little bit more facilitation, we do offer workshops. They're all over the place, and we're getting requests to do them in different parts of the world, so it's really exciting, it's really cool. The picture that you're looking at here is one that we did in Berlin back at the end of 2016. But we're running them in Helsinki, and Dubai, and New York. We've done them in Romania, and then we have requests for all places all over the world. So they are, again, like Duco Plus, they're a 2-day format. So again, the team doesn't have to commit to a full 5 days. And if that seems like a good fit for you, there's a link down at the bottom. You guys can go check out the workshops that we offer. And by all means, if you don't see your city or your country or state listed, reach out to us, because we're talking to people constantly about bringing them into new parts of the world. And then lastly, so for the polluted, truly toxic environments, unfortunately, sometimes no matter how much you pitch and you plan and you plot, and even if you have more than yourself that are excited about sprints, sometimes just being inside your own company means that you don't know what you're talking about. But others that come in and talk about the same thing that you would be talking about, just because we're outside of your company, people will listen to us, to them. And in that case, maybe a facilitated sprint will help start to build some momentum around that. So there's also a link down here for you guys to check out if you think that a facilitated sprint from our team would be helpful to you guys. So that is everything. There's a few more resources here, but I think, Margaret, we're ready for some Q&A.
Laura had a good question. She said, how are design sprints different from dev sprints? Isn't development part of a design sprint?
Yeah, so, right. Like I said, unfortunately, design sprints probably wasn't the best terminology to use, and there was a lot of confusion around that. So development sprints really are typically kind of like your 2-week burn downs, right, where you have your product backlog, and you're plucking off features, and you're working through those as actual features that you're getting launched and getting live live testing on and live feedback on. A design sprint is much earlier in the process. The idea of a design sprint is to get a lot of validation before you dip into actual product development. Because once there's plenty of charts out there that show, as time goes on, the cost of rebuilding and rethinking solutions is, exponentially rises. So a design sprint is intended to help you at the way early stage, when you're just thinking about challenges to be solved, to make sure that there's some validation around the solutions that you intend on building within a development sprint.
Awesome. And Anshul asked, how do you get executives back on board after the first design sprint that was conducted has failed?
Well, right. So I respect the fact that first impressions are sometimes lasting, and it's hard. I think maybe what would be helpful is to, instead of pushing for another design sprint, maybe to try out just a 2-day workshop, right? Where you take something and agree to do something as a skunkworks. I know a lot of companies get excited about taking the biggest, baddest, most revenue generating project as the first thing that they want to work through. And I get why you'd want to do that. And I get why executives would say, if I'm going to do this, it's got to be something that's worth doing. But it's a process, and you're going to fall on your face a little bit, and it's going to be rough and tumble. But again, that's why setting expectations up front is so important. But if you've tried and failed, I hope that you can take some of the things that we've covered today and maybe repitch the process and talk about what you've learned and talk about why they failed, right? At every stage, you should be using what you've learned to compare where you were before. I would want to, I don't know what you've been through or who your team is or what you're working toward, but in my heart, I want to challenge that even the sprint that failed was better than where you were before. And others in the team might not feel that way, but that's why it's important to start putting things in front of people. Maybe the only thing that happened was you had 2 people in the room that actually worked together really well together for the first time ever. And it's things like that, right? If the only thing a design sprint achieves is improving team morale, I think that's something that's worth talking about and worth putting back in front of those people, and then talking about how they labeled it as a failure and what you've learned since then and where you can take it from there. And again, instead of jumping into the next design sprint for the next big initiative, maybe just do like a training and invite that person in so that they can witness and observe a little bit, and hopefully there's a little bit more approval to move forward.
I think that's a great point, that idea that the design sprint failed. I'm curious whether, what they were working on was invalidated, or whether, the whole team itself kind of stopped working together in the middle of the design sprint. So I think that makes a lot of sense, that it can even show it can help out with interpersonal collaboration and some of those other things that you might not end up with a validated product.
Right. Yeah, and you're not alone, for sure. That is the reason that we're here talking today, because a lot of teams have tried and failed. And we were fortunate enough that when we did it for small things that we were working on. We did it for our own products that we were building in new haircut labs. But there's plenty. I talk to people every day that share stories, maybe not every day, but every week, that share stories that say, I really wanted to do it, so I agreed to do like a 1-day sprint over like a conference bridge, and everyone was, not paying attention and not doing things. So make sure, there's kind of like this, you have to feel comfortable that you're going to follow enough of the tenets of what needs to happen for a sprint to be successful before you agree to do it, and if they're just not willing to get you to that stage and give you the full authority to run an entire 5-day sprint, then start with what you have and build on what's working today. There's a lot of great ideas and concepts shared from within companies like IDEO that talk about change management and really kind of starting at that seed level and building upon what works today, and then get to the point where you're ready for a design sprint. So maybe you don't go back to that person and say, we're ready to run a design sprint again, but maybe you're ready to do this much smaller piece and just build your way up there. I like to say it's much more organic, and it'll evolve into itself. And then you'll get people that are just kind of naturally enrolled in the process and excited about it.
Great advice. Juan asked, when it comes to the build part of the process, have you ever tried to run in parallel design sprints with a team working on agile development? If yes, how was that experience, and how did both teams coexist?
Well, I'll answer based on what I think you mean, and then we can always follow up afterwards. So just for context, the most I think we can accommodate in a single month are like 2 sprints. For each sprint team, that is. And this has been backed up by the design partners I've spoken to at GV as well, where they'll sometimes I've emailed them and they don't answer me for a week, and I'm like, oh, they're in a sprint. And then the next week they're kind of back in the office and doing things, because they always block out a week in between sprints. So I think just for reference, I think the most a human being should be subjected to in terms of running a sprint is about 2 per month. And then there is just going to be this kind of natural handoff between if you do some of those wrap-up exercises and move into product development, those things tend to take about, in our experience, about a week to move from really kind of stepping back, understanding what you learned in the sprint, and then setting yourselves up for whether it's doing a code sprint, whether it's doing actual wireframes, but moving into more of that build stage. So I'm not sure if I answered your question 100%, but certainly if you have multiple teams working on multiple products, for sure, you can have sprints running in parallel to actual coding and designing, for sure. But I don't think you would ever have a scenario where what needs to get built in those development sprints is still happening in the design sprint. You need the design sprint to wrap up so that because again, maybe at the end of the sprint you've invalidated what you entered the sprint to challenge to begin with. So yeah, I'd let the sprint kind of run its course, and then you can move into product development in the days and weeks that follow.
Interesting. And what's your point of view for having development included in the conversations during the design sprint?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's these different roles we always talk about in our workshops, where you have your designer and your facilitator, right? And then you have other people that join the sprint as well. And one of those people, especially when we're talking in the realm of software development, one of those people really should be an engineer. And I think of all the people that I've spoken with directly or heard from indirectly, engineers seem to be the most frazzled group in terms of how a design sprint, if it's really going to help them and how it can help them, because again, they're typically being sort of fed marching orders, and then it's in their hands to go and build these really, these experiences for these customers that they never really met and they never talked to and they never heard from. So having an engineer in the room is critical. And on top of it, just to even much more tactical, engineers are probably a good resource to go and help out in terms of building out prototypes. And they're there also to just start to talk about what's feasible from a technology perspective. Because again, it's a little early in the discussion when you're in a design sprint to be talking about all of the feasibility of building the solutions that you're tinkering on in the design sprint, but having that sort of sounding board to say, if we're trying to do this thing in 3 months and 6 months, we have to bring it down a couple of levels. So engineering is definitely a key role inside the sprint room.
Fantastic. Camille said, my question is, we have a portfolio of products more or less aligned. How can we scale and align outcomes from a single design sprint into the overall portfolio? And there's a follow-up question as well that might give a little bit more depth. That's, if we are building several products at once, we want to have them all aligned. In Scrum, we use Scrum of Scrums for many interconnected products, teams, product owners. How about from the design sprint point of view?
Right. So this is a great question. And I face this many times, especially when I go into larger enterprise-sized corporations, where, again, they want to make sure that it's not just a project that we're talking about, but it's something that will scale and that they can enroll everyone in the company, ideally everyone in the company under. And I think if this is your first time working through a sprint, get through the entire sprint, soup to nuts, get through it. Don't try to do many all at once. Again, I get it that there's some allure to trying to do more things at once, but I would really strongly recommend that you go through an entire process, the pre-sprint stuff as much as you can do and feel comfortable about, the sprint itself, build, and then get to the point where you've built a product that's come out of a sprint and it's in customers' hands and you're hearing from them. You need that validation that it worked in order for you to have any sort of soapbox to stand on top of it and say, this thing works. because you're not going to get other department, division, organizational leaders to put their budget, to throw their budget in the ring and say, yeah, I'm willing to do this, unless you've shown that you have some metrics of success. So I'd recommend, if it's your first one, get through an entire thing. And then at that point, sure, then go through your training like we talked about inside of Scale. And let me just, I don't know, Margaret, if you still have, oh.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I just want to put this screen back up. When we talked about Scale, this is probably more direct. Once you're at the point that you can bring this out and roll it out to other teams, this is where it's going to be important to, again, show the success that you've had, enroll others in, start to do some training around it, and then use the process that we talked about that leads up to the sprint to identify the next projects, products, initiatives, business opportunities that you can run through. Once you've identified all those, then I think it makes sense to start doing things in parallel, but you'll certainly need multiple teams in order to get through that.
Awesome. Apostrophe Co asked, how do you get other team members to understand that in order to be successful at the design and development stage, you need information up front? So I think they're talking about maybe including other team members like marketing or maybe even legal, and how do you make sure that they're involved?
Yeah, so, and that's a great question. And we've been, and just to share a quick story, I know we only have a minute or so left, but we've been in a room where people had been talking about a thing, a problem, and a solution that they wanted to work through that they've been thinking about for a couple of years. And on the second day of the sprint, we invalidated all of the things that they had been thinking about and doing. So that it's really important to set yourself up as much as you can for success, aligning the business with getting all the kind of information out of the stakeholders' heads, really having this sort of foundation of trust to build upon from there, and then kind of working through and mapping out how that will align with what your customers are looking for and thinking about. In terms of legal and all these other things, that's a great question. I don't have a good answer for you today. I'm sure there's specific things that legal representation and CFOs are looking to hear about. So we can take that offline, and maybe I can understand a little bit more about what you're trying to work through there and do as best as I can to answer.
Awesome. And I think that's all the time we have for today. If we happen to not have answered your question, I encourage you to go on Twitter and use that hashtag DesignTalks, and Jay will be answering those questions after the fact. Jay, thank you so much for chatting with us today and sharing your knowledge, and a big thank you to everyone who attended today. I hope you have a great rest of your day and you keep designing awesome things.
Thanks, Margaret.